Good morning. Welcome to our 38th Coffee with the Commissioner event. Changing it up a little bit this morning, but we do have a special guest with us this morning. First Florida Congressional District Congressman Matt Gaetz has got up early this morning to join us. Actually, he's probably been up for hours working already. But Matt, good morning. Welcome.
Oh, good morning. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, obviously we're all going through a lot of things at all various levels. You at the federal level, us at the local level, and I just wanted to have you on board to talk about the federal response to this pandemic. You know, obviously at the local level, we've had to close the beaches, we've had to close a lot of businesses and things of this nature. And I guess the first question I'll throw at you is, as a nation, do you think we went too far in our reaction to this pandemic?
Well, you'll remember, Jeff, that the original projections thought that we could lose 2.2 million Americans to this virus if we took no action. And so I think that when you're weighing that type of a loss of life for your country, you always have to put your people first. You have to put their health and well-being. And, you know, when I remember back to you and I on the campaign trail when we ran for these jobs and folks asked us about taxes and economic development and our great military and veterans, but no one really asked us how we would combat a crazy Chinese bat virus.
Exactly.
And I don't know that it was something either of us anticipated, but I think what we've seen is that, you know, a robust response on the front end can potentially help us recover faster. And I would really encourage all of our constituents to go and watch the press conference that President Trump and Governor DeSantis did yesterday, where they really laid out the case specific to Florida. Because in every part of the country, we're not going to have the same transmission rates, we're not going to have the same hospitalization rates and intubation rates. And so potentially, you know, the nation as a whole can unlock at different times, and I actually expect an announcement today from our governor that will put us on the path to begin phase one of the reopening on May 4th.
Well, that's great news, because I can tell you we had a county commission meeting yesterday. It was very, very contentious, and the one subject on our agenda, Congressman, was the opening of the beach, because you know, the county commission, we did not close any business. We did not close anyone's livelihood down. You know, we were just following the governor's executive orders. And the only thing that we did was, you know, we shut the beach down when the hospitals begged us to do so. The hospitals begged us. The health department begged us to do it. So a lot of contentious, and a lot of folks are conflating the closing of the businesses down with the closing of the beaches. Well, we reopened the beach. And the message that I got loud and clear from my constituents yesterday is we need to open up the rest of the economy. So, you know, I know that you speak with the governor frequently. When do you think that might start to happen, where people could go to restaurants and get back to normal?
I believe that on May 4th, that reopening will begin. And I believe that Northwest Florida will be on the front end of that reopening. I think that in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, they're still dealing with a higher number of cases, more hospitalizations, that they don't want this thing to really flare beyond their ability to contact trace. Here, you know, as I've talked to the governor, he's keenly aware that our circumstances and opportunities in the Panhandle are different than those in other parts of the state. And so I suspect that we will have the ability to have, you know, some retail, some food service that is available very soon. And we're going to have to get a lot smarter about the technology that we use. You know, I was talking to a restaurateur in Pensacola yesterday, Jeff, who told me that they're investing in these, you know, laser temperature checks, so that every time any employee comes in, they can check the temperature of their employees and give their customers confidence that they can come and engage in commerce safely.
No, and I've seen some of that too. In fact, the CEO of Walmart was on last night, I believe, on Tucker Carlson, one of the shows, and he was talking about the same thing. They're using the temperature scanners. Ironically, the problem is you can't even find those now online, and when they send them to you, they send you the wrong ones. It's really kind of tough. But I think the businesses will be able to adapt. I think the restaurants in particular. Tell me if you agree with this, Congressman. I believe they'll start a reservation system so that they can maximize their 50 or 60%, whatever capacity they're able to utilize. And I think they will adapt, but I think they're all standing around saying, you know, just give us the word. We want to go. But like you, I mean, safety is number one. We're worried about the safety. Matter of fact, here in Pensacola, Escambia County, we've got a long-term care facility that has more cases than any other long-term care facility in the state. So we've got a real problem here that we're addressing. But I want to move on to some federal stuff, because I know you're intimately involved in all of that up there, and you're doing a great job for us. But what do you think the next stimulus packages coming out of Washington are going to look like, and what will they do for our small businesses that are suffering?
I spoke to the president yesterday about CARES 2.0, and we are negotiating to get that on the floor. Here are some elements I think people can expect. Another round of direct payments to individuals. A lot of folks got that through their direct deposit system, and I think there is an expectation that there is additional need for that now, because even if, for example, a restaurant's able to open at 50% capacity, they're not going to hire back 100% of their employees to deal with 50% capacity on day one, because they would go out of business. It
Right.
would be an economically sustainable model. So there'll be another round of direct payments. I do believe that there will be some additional support to state and local governments that have seen costs increase. I don't believe that folks in Escambia County should subsidize the non-COVID related poor economic decisions that they've made in New York and Illinois. I know we would always help our fellow Americans dealing with COVID, but we're negotiating right now this notion of, should we really go and fill the $6 billion budget deficit that New York had before COVID? As a
No.
consequence of this virus. And then, there are always the poison pills. I heard that Democrats were trying to get, things like additional funding for Planned Parenthood and SNAP in the legislation. And I am hopeful that we're able to focus the legislative response on the coronavirus. I don't think that when you're in the crucible, the high-intensity, environment of dealing with a disaster, that you open up the other ambitions that you have legislatively with unrelated programs. So we're trying to keep it constrained to that. I also suspect that for our small businesses, we will see more of a prioritization to onboard community banks to that
Yes.
program. One thing that you've heard, that you've discussed with me, Jeff, offline, is that a lot of our small businesses feel like, if you weren't banking with Capital One or Bank of America, and if you weren't at the front of the line, you might have been behind. Is that what you've been hearing as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. And in particular, here locally, some businesses, depending upon who they banked with, they got their first round of the paycheck protection money. Others that applied early, their banks for whatever reason couldn't get it from their institution over to SBA. So there was a lot of frustration and angst, and that actually, if you don't mind, that kind of segues right into a question I was going to ask you.
Sure.
We've put billions and billions of dollars out for this program, and I know a lot of the small businesses around the country needed it. But as part of that, will there be some sort of metrics that will be provided to the citizens that showed, hey, Bank X took in this many loans based upon this amount of money, and here's how many they got over the line and got passed? Because I know locally, and I won't name them, but there's some banks that you would know the name of that couldn't get it done for their customers. And it'd be good to put that out there so that folks, when they make their banking decisions, who they want to have a banking relationship with going forward for their business, they can make an informed choice. Do you think there'll be some metrics?
Yeah, I don't expect we'll have that information on the Treasury website, because our effort really is focused on getting more of those banks onboarded. I've been troubleshooting with bank executives and SBA and Treasury during most of this process. As a matter of fact, a day doesn't pass when I'm not on the phone with Treasury or SBA or one of our banks to get that done. And as long as the money doesn't run out and we get it to people in time so they don't lose their businesses, we've accomplished the goal. But if anything, Jeff, this probably is a lesson that, the largest distribution of cash by a government in the history of the world is, by its very nature, sloppy and inefficient. Yeah. It's why it's a lot better to have Americans buying a cheeseburger at a restaurant than the government sending a check.
Yes.
Because these are the challenges we face. Here's the bottom line, though. We understand that it's a problem that too many people have, gotten some of these PPP loans that aren't eligible. That's why Treasury put out recent guidance that said there's a temporary amnesty if you applied for this loan and you made a mistake and it didn't really impact your business. Just give the money back and there'll be no problem. But if You and I know businesses that did not see $1 decrease in revenue,
Correct.
but applied anyway and got this money, while hoteliers and bar owners and people whose businesses got literally shut down did not get funded. And so I think you'll see some aggressive enforcement that should restore confidence in the system that the money is going where it needs to go.
No, that'll be very reassuring, Congressman. I'm glad to hear that. And I did hear some of the big people. Harvard University has a gigantic $40 billion endowment, and they got money, but they gave it back. Some of the big restaurant
I
chains.
talked to the president. When I told the president that Harvard got $9 million, he literally called in his deputy chief of staff and fashioned a tweet before my very eyes that he wanted that back. And actually, we got Harvard and Stanford and MIT and a bunch of those folks to give back their paycheck protection. They don't need it.
No.
The people who need it are the folks you and I know who have 10 vacation rentals and 3 employees and are trying to make sure they get by.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'm glad that they're going to yank that money back from those folks that didn't need it. Hey, now we're talking about money a little bit, and I know this is a tough subject, but it's one that's been on my mind. I've been a Republican since I was 18. I turned 18 when Ronald Reagan was president, and been fiscally conservative in the way I manage my finances in my house, the businesses that I've owned, et cetera, et cetera. But in Washington, things just seem to get out of whack and crazy. I know we needed to intervene strongly in the midst of this pandemic, but a lot of folks like me are wondering about the long-term sustainability of borrowing trillions and trillions of dollars. In fact, I've heard on some talk shows they've called it outright fraud. So how do we borrow trillions and trillions of dollars and get to a point where our national debt is bigger than our GDP, and we get to levels we haven't seen since World War II? How do we recover from that, Congressman? And what do we do? Is it sustainable?
Yeah, it is not sustainable to continue doing what we are doing now. But the reason that folks like you and I and other fiscal conservatives make the case to not go and lavishly spend just because we can is because we understand that in times of crisis, our government does have to be there for our people.
Right.
You and I don't pinch pennies when we're providing provision to people after a hurricane.
Right.
We don't pinch pennies when there's a mother with a sick infant and in our Medicaid program. And so this is a moment when our whole country is in that struggle. So the bad news is we can't keep doing this, and we do have to open up and get back into the accelerated economic growth we were in before the coronavirus. But here's the good news. We are in a global liquidity crisis right now, everywhere.
Yeah.
And the U.S. dollar remains stronger than ever.
Yes, it
so
does.
we aren't really borrowing all of this money as much as we are printing it.
Right.
And I don't say that to be particularly proud,
Yeah.
but when we put the American dollar out, people all over the world want it. They want to buy it. And that's why we haven't yet seen the type of inflation that would normally come with this type of monetary policy, because we're really leveraging the strength of the U.S. dollar globally to provide provision to our people in crisis.
No, that's a very, very succinct answer to a very complex problem. And it's probably not fair of me to throw it at you like that, but it's on a lot of people's...
It's the issue of our day, Jeff. It's really important.
Well, and another issue of our day, and again, I want to thank Congressman Matt Gaetz for taking time out of his schedule to join us this morning on Coffee with the Commissioner. I saw last night on the news, a lot of us have seen the run on the grocery stores, the toilet paper, now the hand sanitizer is disappearing. But now I've heard something like 36 meat packing plants around the country are shutting down due to COVID outbreaks, and they can't get workers to come in to process the meat. Do you worry about the supply chain breaking down? I've seen that a few places. And if so, what can the federal government do to ensure that it doesn't break down and that the food that we're seeing, farmers plowing over their crops and dumping their milk, how can we get that back into the supply chain to make sure that our communities have food and everything we need?
Yeah, this is a serious issue. There are no chickens and cows behind the Publix and the Winn-Dixie where we all shop in Northwest Florida. These all come from processing entities that are vulnerable to coronavirus and have seen some shutdowns. So, I do believe that only the federal government can work to synchronize the elements of this system. Secretary Perdue is working hard on that. But, Jeff, I got to tell you, one of the things that has us behind the 8 ball unnecessarily in building resilience in our food supply chain is that the person in our government that is supposed to be in charge of that day in, day out, preparing for something like this, has been waiting for more than 2 years to be confirmed by the United States Senate. So the position stands vacant because the Senate is moving moving slower in confirmations than at any other point in American history.
Wow.
Because of animosity to President Trump. And so you might normally not think, well, why does it matter to me that Chuck Schumer's holding up an appointment in the Department of Agriculture? And this is why it matters. When we need to animate our government to respond for our people, if we don't have folks with experience who've been in place, who've been working and planning and doing the type of tabletop exercises that I know you guys do in crisis response preparation in Escambia County, then we don't have all the tools to be able to marshal that response. And so I am concerned about food supply chain. So far, we've been able to adjust, but if we continue to see these processing facilities go down, we will see an impact in the grocery stores. Hopefully the testing that you and I discussed earlier in the program will be helpful to get folks back in those processing plants and get them going.
No, that's a great answer, and it is a concern, and I do think, like you, the key is the testing. We got to know how prevalent this is, what the percentages really are, and then we get a better handle. And I do think the government's doing a lot more than they're getting credit for in the media. I'll just say that, and I think people that pay attention know that as well. This next question is, you don't have to answer it. I know, and please feel free not to if you don't want to. But, as we saw from the taking of the hostages in Iran in 1979, all the way through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the terrorist attacks against America, the bombing of the Cole, and then the Khobar Towers, and then all the other things. And a lot of folks after 9/11 said, wow, they were coming after us for many decades, and we just didn't wake up to it. And now, you see this, what China has done with their unfair trade practices, their currency manipulation. Now in the South China Sea, they're taking islands and making islands out of coral reefs, and they're trying to dictate who can come through international waters. They're getting the rare earth elements. They've conscripted all our production, all the manufacture of critical components of medicines and vitamins and a lot of things, and we've outsourced a lot of our manufacturing there. And now we have this. And we've heard different theories. Are we just now waking up to something similar to that? I mean, is this a provocation?
Well, for years, I've been telling my colleagues that China is our greatest geopolitical threat. We are in a battle with China to win this century, and they spent a lot of that time saying that Russia was our biggest threat.
Right.
So we did kind of take our eye off the ball as a country, I think, during that. But this has reawakened us to the fact that we really built China. I mean, you think back to the 80s and 90s, Jeff. I mean, China was functionally a third world country. And as a consequence of decisions that both Republicans and Democrats have made over the last several decades, we have built up the economy of China at the expense of our people.
That's right.
And it's not that we had a bad deal with them, it's that we really had no deal. And when the World Trade Organization designated China a developing country, they got all these advantages that our people didn't get.
That's right.
And our workers didn't get. And so, yes, I do believe that China aims to provoke. I believe that if you just look at this coronavirus, they had this thing sequenced on the 2nd of January and didn't share it with the world until January 12th. Those 10 days would have been critical to understand the communicability of the virus, the acuity of it, the spread, the traits, but they were thinking, I think, very selfishly in that regard and not like a partner. So China is not our friend. In the coming months and years, I suspect we'll need stronger policies to re-domesticate our manufacturing base, to become more resilient, particularly with our medical equipment,
yes.
And then to confront China where they engage in precisely the activities you identified, and you hit the key spots on trade, on military. The other one I would suggest is intellectual property.
Yes,
they steal and then undermine American businesses. If we go on offense in those regards, we don't need a hot war with China, and I think one would be very unlikely, but I think we can reassert America in a way that's productive for our people.
No, what a great answer, and that's fantastic. Hey, as a final question, so if it comes out that this virus, wasn't by accident or was negligence, or should China pay us back? Should they pay us back for the trillions we've spent and for the lives that we lost?
There should be consequences for China. I'm actually one of the sponsors of legislation with my colleague Dan Crenshaw to lift the immunity that China would have, so that if Americans have died or dealt dealt with consequences that they could actually collect against China in a class action lawsuit. So
Wow.
We'll continue to keep folks updated on that. And if it's okay, I know we're at the end of our chat, but can we just take a moment to reflect on some good news that all
Yes.
of America got to see our great Blue Angels out there
Yes.
flying with the Thunderbirds across the country. I was so proud of them, and so proud that they called Pensacola home.
No, absolutely, Congressman Gates. That was a proud moment to watch that last night as they flew over New York to salute the healthcare workers. Thank you for all you're doing. I know it's tough up there. I know there's a lot of pressure on you guys in Congress, and a lot of times I know that you're the voice of fiscal sanity, and sometimes you don't. You know, you're in the minority. But we appreciate your work, and I appreciate you taking time this morning to talk to us. Had a little bit of technical glitches, but I appreciate your thoughtful answers, and hopefully we can have you on the show again. I look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll do it in person next time. And just a final thought. I know a lot of people are anxious and struggling now, Jeff, but we should really thank God for our military and for the military mission that we have here, not just in the way that it reflects on our community's patriotism, but the economic stability it provides. Right now, our
Yes.
civil servants, our military families are still seeing a paycheck.
Yes.
And I think that when we're able to get businesses open, we'll really call on those who have stayed stable economically in the military economy to get out there and spend some money and help our fellow Northwest Floridians return to prosperity. You in particular have been a great advocate for the military mission at NAS Pensacola, where it's growing every day. And without great partnership with all of our counties, I don't know that we would be able to continue to attract so much more mission to our area, but it's a great team effort. And in times like this, in times of crisis, it sure is helpful that we've got that baseline, that strong, steady element of our local economy.
No, absolutely, 100%. All right, Congressman. Well, you have a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye. And thank you for joining us.